Good morning. I've told the Secretary that we have a pretty tough job here. We're the warm-up act for Tom Brokaw and Bill Clinton. The good news is we're not following them, which is a pretty big thing. Mr. Secretary, I think we're in the post-denial phase of talking about the deficit, both Democrats and Republicans.
What follows denial? Anger?
I hope so. And then I think Pete Peterson hopes someday you get the solution. And you got a few months left in this president's term to get there. But I think that a lot of people are wondering why anybody should believe that our polarized political system is capable of doing something that touches as many people as this. Why should we believe that this can happen?
Well, I agree. This is going to be a huge test of the ability of this political system to come together and make some sensible, tough decisions for the economy. You know, you guys are going to spend the day thinking about this long-term challenge of restoring fiscal sustainability. But as you do that, it's important to remember, and I think Pete said this right in the beginning, that we face a lot of challenges as a country. We have to worry about how we're going to make growth stronger so we get more people back to work, repair the damage from the worst financial crisis in generations. How are we going to make sure that growth comes with more broad-based income growth with expanded opportunity? How do we make the investments in human capital and competitiveness to make that necessary? And of course, we have to think about how we come together and put in place a balanced package that allows us to go back to living within our means. But those are all challenges we have to think about as we think about the crafting a political consensus on this long-term fiscal reform plan. And remember that because that's why it's so important that you need to bring some broader balance to this choice. And you need to think about balance in several respects. You want to make sure that you're phasing in the reforms so that they don't undermine recovery. You want to make sure that the spending restraints and cuts and reforms come alongside tax reforms that raise a modest amount of revenue, so you're not putting too much of the burden on the middle class or on retirees, on our ability to compete and grow in the future, on public goods and in education infrastructure, things like that. And you need to make sure that you're doing this in a way that not just shares the burden and responsibility more broadly in a way that's fair, but that protects the basic commitment to the safety net for retirees and low-income Americans. Remember that this crisis hit an American economy where even before the crisis, 20% of kids in the United States are living below the poverty line, and 40% of Americans born in the United States are born to families qualified for Medicaid. So think about that as you think about this basic challenge of not just restoring fiscal sustainability, but doing so in a way that has some balance and recognizes the essential challenges of how we grow, how we compete, how we protect that basic commitment to retirement security.
When you talk about balance, I think you mean, or we interpret you mean, that includes revenue increases and includes some public investment. The Republicans seem disinterested in that, and compromise seems to have become a sign of weakness. So that's a very nice platform you laid out, but is there any chance of getting that through our political system the way it's now constituted?
I think reality forces it, because we've come to the judgment, as have all the other bipartisan efforts to look at this, from Bowles-Simpson to Rivlin-Domenici to the work of the Senate 6 or the Senate 8, whatever they call themselves now, and not least the conclusions of this group here, which is that to do this in a way that meets these other set of challenges we face, you can't do it without trying to get a modest amount of additional revenues through tax reform. If you look at how Americans feel about this, I think all measures show that recognition is shared by very broad majorities of the American people, including Republicans and independents, not just Democrats. And remember, we're not talking about asking Americans to embrace increased revenues through tax reforms without a comprehensive set of other constraints on spending, so that we're reducing deficits as we do that. So what we're saying is, here's a balanced package where you can say to people who we're going to ask to pay a modestly higher share of their income and revenues, we can assure them that contribution is going to come alongside of reforms that lock in sustainable deficits for the long run. But at the same time, we're asking the vast bulk of Americans to recognize we're going to have to slow the rate of growth in healthcare costs, that sacrifice is not going to go to support tax cuts we can't afford. tax rates that are unaffordable in that context. So that's the basic balance in the framework, and I think reality will drive the American political system towards that result.
Well, I'm glad you're endorsing reality. The Peterson people, I had a Facebook.
You know, there's a famous Muhammad Ali line. He says, you know, I'm not going to get this perfect, but he says, you know, I used to come in the room and in the ring, and my opponents had a strategy, and then I hit them. And you know, what drives people to this pragmatic recognition of the need for balance is just when you confront the basic fiscal math of this reality. And you know, this fiscal math is not Republican or Democratic. It's just reality.
The Peterson Foundation had some kind of contest on Facebook to come up with questions to ask you, and one of them came from a guy named Rick Pollock from Shelburne, Vermont. And he asked, how bad does the debt have to get before there's serious bipartisan effort to make the difficult choices, and how close to the edge do you think we are right now?
Well, I think anybody who's had the responsibility of governing has to recognize that these deficits are unsustainable over the long run. And you know, we have a 10-year problem, meaning we have an immediate problem of restoring deficits to a level where the debt starts falling as a share of the economy. But we also have a 50-year problem, 100-year problem. Even beyond that initial period, we have a set of challenges. So those commitments we made are unsustainable, and we have to bring them back to earth. There's no doubt about it. But we are in a much stronger position to manage those challenges than is true for any other major economy in the world, because we're a younger country, because our underlying growth rates are stronger, because we started with relatively low debt burdens before the crisis, and because the level of taxes in our economy is so remarkably low, and because the commitments we make in our safety net are still very modest compared to the needs of most Americans. So we're in a much stronger position to deal with these kind of things. And so, again, we should put this in perspective. We have the unique abilities as a country not to put ourselves in a situation where we commit to an irresponsibly steep path of austerity because of fear of what's a long-term but manageable problem, and sacrifice the other major needs and challenges of the country. We don't need to do that.
So do you think...
But we're just saying we can't put it off forever. We're close enough now for this to matter a lot. We can't run the country on the assumption that the world's going to always have confidence in the ability of the American political system to act. We have to earn that confidence over time. We have to justify that confidence. That's going to require us doing more in the near term to make some progress in this challenge.
And is there any real prospect of doing something before the end of this calendar year, or are we going to be faced again with gridlock versus kicking the grenade down the road?
Well, absolutely, because you know this set of expiring tax measures and automatic spending cuts should be a very powerful incentive for people on both sides of the aisle to figure out a balanced package of dealing with these kind of things. Again, it's not that complicated. We can do it without asking Americans to bear an unacceptable burden, unacceptable pain for an economy still healing from crisis, if you do it in a balanced way with the reforms spread across the economy as a whole. And you know, the scale of the adjustments we have to make on top of what we agreed to last summer, they're significant, but they're not beyond our capacity as a country. So absolutely we have the opportunity to do it. And I think that there's a very strong, powerful incentive for politicians to make some progress on this.
One of the things that we face, I think, before the end of the year, correct me if I'm wrong, is a need to raise the debt ceiling again. And as you know, Speaker Boehner, in a copy of the remarks he's going to make here later today, said that he'll go along with an increase in the debt ceiling only if it's accompanied by, in his words, cuts and reforms greater than the increase in the debt limit. Is that going to be a problem?
Well, I think all that could possibly be said about the debt limit has already been said, but I want to just say...
But not everybody said it.
One important thing. This commitment to meet the obligations of the nation, this commitment to protect the creditworthiness of the country, is a fundamental commitment you can never call into question or violate. It's just the foundation for any market economy. It's the foundation of our financial system. It allows us to govern, to fight wars, to deal with crises, recessions, to adjust to a changing world. You can't put that into question. You can't put it into doubt. You can't put that at the service or threaten to undermine that in the service of the partisan political agenda of any side of the American political spectrum. Not responsible to do that. Only Congress, of course, can act to raise the debt limit. And you know, we hope they do it this time without the drama and the pain and the damage they caused the country last July.
Can you separate the debt limit increase from the broader fiscal and growth agenda?
Well, on the current estimates, and these are going to change. We're likely to hit the debt limit sometime before the end of the year, but Congress has given the executive branch a set of tools that buy them some time, and those tools will probably take us into the early part of 2013, thus separating somewhat the timing of the expiry of the tax cuts and the sequester with the ultimate need for Congress to act on the debt limit. They should do it as soon as they can, but that's the basic sequence in this context. Again, I want to underscore the basic objective. Our objective should be to replace that very large set of expiring tax provisions and broad-based, automatic, pretty crude spending cuts with a more responsible, balanced glide path to fiscal sustainability. And that should not be a difficult challenge for a country that's been able to deal with much harder challenges in the past.
Well, other countries are dealing with problems, notably in Europe. It seems that they pursue austerity. The more they pursue it, their economies falter. That makes their budget problems worse. But if they don't pursue austerity, the markets punish them, rates go up, and their budget problems get worse. What lessons should we draw from what's happened in Europe?
Europe's in a fundamentally different situation than the United States, and so it's hard to compare the challenges they face. They're nothing like ours are so much more modest and manageable compared to theirs. But we should welcome this new debate about growth in Europe. I think it's a welcome debate. They have a stronger set of tools to manage the crisis now in place, and that allows them to shift the focus where they should to how they create the conditions for more growth. And let me just point out to three things that are in the air in Europe now, which are, I think, encouraging recognition of that reality. One is you're seeing them talk about a better balance between growth and austerity, meaning a somewhat more gradual, softer path to restoring fiscal sustainability. And that's appropriate to recognize, because you said if you have to respond to every disappointment in growth by cutting spending immediately, raising taxes immediately, then you put yourself in a negative spiral of growth killing austerity. That's very damaging. You've also seen there's some important talk about trying to put in place long-term public infrastructure investments targeted to the countries with the biggest growth challenge. That's encouraging too. And you're seeing the Germans and others recognize that you need to see a sustained period where wages rise more rapidly in Germany than they do in other parts of Europe, so the rest of Europe can regain competitiveness. And so I think those aspects of the broader debate you're seeing on growth are welcome and encouraging, but they've got a long way to go, a very difficult set of challenges, and they just need to make sure that they can convince the world that they're going to manage these challenges. We have a big stake in the managing, but then we're going to manage these challenges with less risk of damage to the economies of the rest of the world and the United States.
And if Greece is forced out of the euro before they get to this wonderful package of slower austerity and public investment and more growth, what happens?
Well, the Greeks, have a particularly unique set of challenges, and they're in the process now of trying to figure out, can they form a government, and that government's going to have to decide on what strategy they can support politically going forward. But Europe as a whole has a very strong incentive in doing what it's going to take to make monetary union work, and that's what the arc of reforms of the last 6 months in particular have been designed to do. They're trying to put in place the sets of mechanisms for disciplining fiscal policy and cooperating on fiscal policy, for sharing fiscal resources, for managing a financial system that you need to make monetary union work. And I think their decision, confronted with this fear of broad erosion in the European experiment, is to redouble their commitments to try to make the thing work. And of course, we believe they have the ability to do that. And again, we hope they manage this process, very difficult set of challenges, with less risk of damage to us and the rest of the world.
And do we learn anything from their experience, or is it just totally different?
Well, again, the challenges are very different, but if you listen to where we started this conversation, what we're trying to do is make sure that Americans recognize that as we restore gravity to our long-term fiscal position, we have to make sure we do that in ways that does not undermine recovery, does not set us back on this path to healing the damage caused by the crisis, and gives us the room and the ability to invest in things like education, human capital, infrastructure, better incentives for investment, for investments in basic science and research. Those are the things that we need to be able to grow and expand opportunity in the United States going forward. And if we are unsuccessful in doing those things, then our fiscal challenges over the long run will be much worse, much more difficult to manage.
Our fiscal challenges will also be difficult if growth is slow, of course, and you made that point earlier. Do you think that we're seeing some kind of global downshift in growth when you look at China, India, concerns about what's happened to job growth here?
Well, I think that let's start with the U.S. and then look at the world. Obviously, we still live in a dangerous, uncertain world. It's good to remind people of that. But the American economy is gradually getting stronger. You're seeing more strength across the American economy. You're seeing companies rebuild their capital stock, rebuild their workforce, hire people back to work. Americans are bringing down their debt burdens, where the financial sector, of course, is bringing down leverage quite significantly. And you're seeing the modest initial steps at state and local level, not just the federal level, to try to restore fiscal balance. So we're doing a lot of the really tough work you need to grow our way out of, adjust out of, and dig our way out of the mess that caused the crisis. And I think growth now looks more broad-based and resilient in the United States. You can see that in the confidence measures too. But obviously it's still a challenging, uncertain world, and we should be, it's another reason to just keep focusing on the reality that there's things we need Congress to do now to try to make the economy stronger in the short run. The President's laid out an agenda for Congress in that area, and we would be in a better position to manage the pressures we see from outside the United States if Congress was able and willing to make some more progress on these near-term growth challenges.
Another thing that's caught people's eye in the last few days, of course, has been the $2 billion mistake at J.P. Morgan. And I wondered what lessons you draw from that. Do you think that we ended up with banks that are simply too big to manage and we have to find a way to make them simpler and smaller?
Good question. I think this failure of risk management is just a very powerful case for reform, for financial reform. The reforms we still have ahead and the reforms we've already put in place. The test of reform is not whether you can prevent banks from making mistakes, errors of judgment, or risk management. That's going to happen. It's inevitable. The test of reform should be, do those mistakes put at risk the broader economy, the financial system, or the taxpayer? And the best way to prevent that from happening is to make sure that you force banks to hold more capital against risk, which we've done, to fund themselves more conservatively, to bring down leverage, and to make sure that the rest of the system, financial system, has better cushions against these kind of mistakes. And we have been very forceful and effective very early in how we managed in the broader financial rescue and trying to make sure we're forcing much more capital into the system early in that context. And that's good. But we are going to work very hard to ensure that these reforms are tough and effective, not just the Volcker Rule, but the broader complementary reforms on capital and liquidity on derivatives markets, again, so that when firms make a mistake, which is inevitable, those mistakes don't put at risk the broader fortunes, the broader health, the broader security of the economy as a whole.
So should we look at this as an example of the system working, that J.P. Morgan could lose $2 billion and its capital still has plenty of capital? Or is it an example of bad regulation and bad risk management that they shouldn't have been taking these kind of risks?
Well, it's definitely a risk management failure, as they've acknowledged. We've had four pretty serious tests of the American financial system, even after this crisis. You had a profoundly difficult, challenging shock from Europe, financial crisis in Europe. You had the failure of a pretty large financial institution in non-bank and MF Global. You had the debt limit trauma, where we actually saw money flow into the U.S. banking system because of confidence in the basic strength of the system. And you had this pretty significant risk management failure. And our system is much stronger than it was before the crisis, and credit and capital is growing again. But still, this points out how important it is that these reforms are strong enough and effective enough, and they can meet that key test. Again, not to protect shareholders from losses, not to prevent the unpreventable in terms of mistakes and judgments, but to make sure when those mistakes happen and they're inevitable, that they're modest enough in size and the system as a whole can handle them. And we're going to work very hard to make sure that we meet that basic test.
Have you talked to Jamie Dimon about this yourself?
Not since the incident, but the Fed and the SEC and the other regulators, and we'll be part of this process, are going to take a very careful look at this incident, of course, and make sure that we review the implications of what that means for the design of these remaining rules. Again, not just the Volcker Rule, which is very important in this context, but broader set of safeguards and reforms that we all depend on.
What are you talking about besides the VOCA rule?
Well, again, you want to look at the full complement of protections, capital, limits on leverage, liquidity requirements so they're less vulnerable to losses of funding, reforms in derivatives markets so that there's more transparency and oversight, you have better capacity to understand and see when you see large positions like this take hold. That's the set of core reforms that we need in this context. And again, I'm very confident we're going to be able to make sure those come out as tough and effective as they need to be. And I think this episode helps make the case, frankly.
When you talk about fiscal issues, the one question you hear often, particularly from audiences like this, is about Bowles-Simpson. Why didn't the president embrace Bowles-Simpson and say, I don't like all of it, instead of what he did? Was that a mistake?
Well, I do think, just to compliment them and their work, they're where this debate started. And I think it's very likely that this debate will end on terms very similar in terms of the broad balance in that package. And if you look at the framework the president's laid out in terms of the balance of spending reforms and the design of them and the tax reforms in that context, very, very similar, of course, as is Rivlin Domenici and as are the things that many people here have spoken about, are going to speak about today. So I think it's likely where it ends. Now, there are things of that in the details that we're going to have to modify. I mean, I'll just give you a couple examples. The defense cuts in Simpson-Bowles were deeper than a commander-in-chief could commit the country to at this moment. The shape of the reforms on Social Security we thought were put too big a burden on the average beneficiary. But in the basic framework of the reforms, again, another example, in the president's framework, we propose as part of a comprehensive set of spending reforms to raise 1% of GDP in revenues through tax reform. That's about $1.5 trillion over 10 years. In Simpson-Bowles, they proposed a $2 trillion increase in revenues, as have some others in that context. So we're much closer to that framework, as are the other bipartisan efforts out there, than are the plans on the table from the president's opponents. And those plans from the president's opponents have the defining features of a very steep, I think irresponsibly steep path of austerity that would be damaging to growth. They have not a dollar of additional committed revenues, which means all the burden will have to fall on Medicare beneficiaries, defense, or the safety net. They cut very, very deeply into the safety net, and they would deeply erode our capacity to invest in things like education, again, in infrastructure or investments that I think anybody who looks at this country recognizes are critical to future growth. So we have much more in common in our basic framework with Bowles-Simpson and the other bipartisan things than do the other you're going to hear about these other proposals. I won't speak for them. But that's the test you have to look at. You have to ask yourself, do the plans provide a plausible strategy for growth, for expanding opportunity, for investing in human capital and education, not just do they restore fiscal sustainability?
On that, I think we'll end. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, David.
Good luck.